Hello, hello.
Slightly behind schedule, we had a small technical issue, but we're here for another MSI Insider live stream. And as you can see, I'm not here alone. I'm here with the one and only
Ruud Zwane.
welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
So I think everyone in chat knows what time it is if you're here, Ruud.
Usually it's demo
right?
time. Yeah, some demoing.
No
Oh,
sound.
no
That's
sound.
weird. Maybe I've been out of reach too long.
And how's my sound? Can you hear me?
Hello, hello. Test 1, 2, 3.
This is Ruud.
I was gone for a while. I think my microphone went in standby. Is this better, guys? It's good now.
Okay.
Good, good. Fixed. This was a quicker fix than the previous issue we had. But yeah, today we're going to do something very cool. I'm actually very hyped up for this live stream. I've been for a couple of weeks already. Because we're going to do some overclocking, but not on a K-SKU CPU, not on a Z-series chipset. We're going to overclock a non-K CPU on an Intel B660 motherboard. So I hope you are just as hyped up as I am. And in this live stream we will of course also have a nice giveaway where you can win a Rainbow Six Extraction game code. So to participate, please go to msi.com/2/insider, or if you're on Twitch or YouTube, our bot will put it in the chat once every 5 minutes. So if you follow that link, you can participate in the giveaway. The more actions you perform, the bigger chance you'll have to win. And throughout the stream we will have several drawings. So once you're in, you don't have to subscribe again for the next drawing. Only need to do it once a week, because next week you can participate again. So let's maybe get into it. I already see something in front of you, but that's the old model, right?
This is the old model.
Or
This
well,
is the
old model.
Yeah, it's not that old, but it's the B660 MORTAR.
This is
Is
the
it DDR4 Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi DDR4?
Wi-Fi DDR4.
Wi-Fi DDR4. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, so that's the existing model basically. Let me quickly show you up close.
Oh, up close. And it's, yeah.
And the one on your test bench looks an awful lot like it, but it's not the same board.
It looks almost identical, to be honest. I don't think you can tell them apart unless you have the part numbers or the model number next to each other.
If you know where to look, there is like one tiny difference that we will talk about later.
Yeah, that should be in the presentation as well, and we can also show it in the video.
Because the board in front of you is the MAG B660M MORTAR Max Wi-Fi DDR4. So the Max tells you that it's not the standard version that we just showed you, but the Max version is slightly different. Most things between these boards are the same. So it's still a micro ATX motherboard based on the Intel B660 chipset. You still get 4 DIMM slots. This is a DDR4 board, so all of them are DDR4. It has 12 times Dr. Moss 60 amp for the vCore VRM, so for the CPU. It has both Realtek 2.5 gigabit LAN and a small difference here, Wi-Fi 6E. Later on I will show you a side-by-side difference between the standard version and the Max version of this board. Another tiny difference you can already see is PCI Express 5.0 times 16 slot. Then it has dual M.2 slots, both are Gen 4 times 4 with M.2 Shield Frozzer. So that's the cooling on top of it. It has a Lightning USB 20G on the Type-C on the rear. And it has a pre-installed I/O shield with the Easy M.2 clip. Let me quickly show you in the detailed.
What do you want to see?
The I/O.
The I/O?
Yeah, so pre-installed I/O shield, and on the Type-C, it's Lightning USB 20G, so 20 gigabit per second.
It should be this one.
Yeah.
Is it in focus?
So it has a bit of difficulties because of the reflection. It's light.
Metal color, yeah.
I see some questions. Can you show the SATA ports?
The SATA ports?
Yes.
Yeah, there's 4 on this side, and there's another 2.
Yep.
Not angled, but
AZN Venom was asking 2 times SATA ports. Now it has 6 in total.
Yeah, 6 in total.
But 4 of them are angled.
On the side angled connectors, and 2 up straight, just on the motherboard, the bottom side.
A Misfit is asking PCI Express Gen 5 already. How much sooner is PCI Express Gen 6 coming out? And Well, this is still the first generation that we're on 5, so don't don't get ahead. And right now, there are no, for example, no graphics cards yet that can support PCI Express Gen 5 or no SSD. So at this point, it wouldn't really make sense to go to 6 while we're still waiting on 5. But yeah, it's definitely nice to have PCI Express Gen 5 already for future products, of course. Massive I/O plate, it looks like. Yeah, it's like the I/O plate itself is like standard size because it needs to fit in the case. But yeah, it's all the way integrated with the extended heatsink cooling there.
I think he means that there's a lot of ports on them.
Yeah,
so it's not empty. Like
no, definitely not.
Yeah.
Elwin is already asking, when can I buy the Max edition? It depends a bit on the region, but quick teaser, it is expected in August in most regions. If it's further away from Asia, shipping will take a bit longer. So then can expect that it will be a bit later. Then it can, for example, be early September. But in most regions, August is what we're aiming for. Artist9TK has a very good question on Twitch. What is the difference between the old model and the new one? So the non-Max model and the Max one. Well, let's get right into that, because the biggest difference between these two boards is this tiny little chip next to the PCI Express slot, basically. So Ruud, can you maybe show the non-Max model in the detailed cam?
I think the
or in the Droid cam is even better indeed.
Should be possible.
Let me connect to your.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay.
So this is the Max model.
The Max model. There's
on
a cooler
Ruud's
in
test
the way.
bench.
Okay, so below that little heatsink, the M.2 heatsink, there's a tiny chip just below my finger, and that's the clock generator.
Yeah, so an external clock generator right next to it.
And I
then
can show you that it's not there on the other board, so it's completely empty.
So no chip over there, and it's a very, very small chip, but it makes quite a big difference.
Yeah, quite a big difference.
I see some people cannot see the link in the chat, so let me quickly check if I can fix this for you. 1 second.
Someone's saying Ruud's mic is a little low.
Okay, I can put you a little bit higher.
Okay.
Okay, let us know if this is better. And then let me also know if you can now access the link that our bot should put in the chat now. On both Twitch and YouTube. So if you're watching on Facebook, for example, our bot is not active there. So there you won't be able to see it, but it should show in a minute on. Someone
is saying there's no link in the website msi.com/insider.
Yeah, that's why we also drop it in chat. For some people, for some reason, it doesn't show up. For me, it does.
Okay.
Elwin Slumgod is saying, can I overclock an F CPU or only non-F? Well, for this specific board, it doesn't matter if it's an F SKU or not. The F basically means that there is no integrated graphics inside the CPU. But for the overclocking capabilities of this board, so basically base clock overclocking, it doesn't matter whether or not it's an F SKU or a non-F SKU. So that is only related to the integrated graphics of the CPU. So let me get back to our slides. So that's a tiny chip, but let's quickly look at the specs side by side. So on the left we have the MAG B660M MORTAR Wi-Fi DDR4, so that's the existing model. And then on the right we have our upcoming MAG B660M MORTAR Max Wi-Fi DDR4. As you can see on the VRM department, well, auxiliary VRM slightly adjusted, but the V-Core VRM is still 12 times 60 amp Dr. Moss. So no changes there. Still has the same extended heatsink cooling. Still has the same 4 DDR4 slots with memory speeds up to 4800 megahertz. The first difference you will see is the PCI Express 4.0 slot on the regular mortar is now a PCI Express 5.0 slot on the Mortar Max. Also has to do with that external clock generator, which is a PCI Express Gen 5 external clock generator. In terms of M.2 storage, it's still the same. You still get the same two M.2 slots. Both of them support Gen 4 times 4. The 2.5 gigabit LAN on these boards is also identical, both Realtek powered. The Wi-Fi, there we made a small upgrade. So on the regular mortar, you will find the Intel AX201, which supports Wi-Fi 6. And on this Max model, you will find the Intel AX211, and that one also supports the 5 gigahertz frequency band, so that is Wi-Fi 6E. So also a small upgrade there. But the most important thing, and this is what we're going to do a lot of demonstrations with today, is the base clock overclocking feature of this motherboard.
Yeah.
With a Z-series chipset in combination with a K-SKU CPU, you have an unlock multiplier and you can overclock by increasing the multiplier. On this board, you cannot do that. So even if you're using a K-SKU CPU, you cannot control the multiplier here. But what you can do is you can adjust the base clock. And basically, the multiplier times the base clock will give you the frequency of the CPU. So if your multiplier is the same, but if you increase the base clock, your total frequency will still increase. So that way you can still do overclocking. Another thing Intel introduced on their B series with B560, and they continued this with their B660, is that you can also do memory overclocking on B series chipsets nowadays. So this Mortar Max motherboard can do both CPU base clock overclocking and memory overclocking. Something important to mention here is that for the CPU overclocking, we're using a specific microcode, which is called U-code, and we're using an older version because with a new version, this is locked by Intel. This also means that if there is whatever reason that you really do need a new microcode, so that can, for example, be future CPU support of this motherboard. I don't know what Intel will launch exactly, but whatever they launch, if it would otherwise work on this motherboard, if you flash the new U-code, you will lose the base clock overclocking functionality. So that is something to keep in mind. Of course, the BIOS version that still has this old microcode where you can do the base clock overclocking will still be available, but you will be limited to the CPUs you can run as of today. So basically that means the current 12th gen Intel Core processor lineup, the current full lineup is supported. Today we will use a Core i5-12400 CPU for this, but you can do this on all models, including the K-SKUs, because you can also overclock them with that base clock, but you won't be able to touch the multiplier. But you can do it on all of them. Price, we'll talk about that later, so stay tuned for that. Let me first show you the full specification list. We won't go into too much details because most we have already talked about. So it's mostly the same compared to the model you already know. Sneak peek, price will be of course slightly higher because of the upgraded Wi-Fi and the external clock generator that is on this motherboard, but don't expect an insane increase compared to the existing motherboard because it's mostly the same motherboard as we mentioned before.
One interesting question.
Yes.
Is there an AMD board coming out with the same clock generator? Well, AMD doesn't lock their CPUs, so the multipliers can be freely adjusted.
Yeah.
So there's no real need to do base clock bus clock overclocking.
So on B series you can do that with AMD. So for example, on a B550 board you can overclock an AMD CPU, but you cannot do it on their A series. I believe.
On the A probably not, but yeah.
But on a mid-range series you can, and of course with their X series as well.
So there's no necessity for AMD boards to have a clock generator per se to have overclocking capabilities on B series motherboards.
Yeah. Artist 9TK is asking, is power consumption is same as old model? This is a bit tricky because on stock, yes, it will not make a big difference with the old model. The main difference will be if you are going to do overclocking by increasing the base clock, you will the higher you go, you will of course need to feed a bit more voltage into it, and that will increase power consumption. So yes, overclocking will increase power consumption, not specifically of your motherboard, but of your CPU. Later on, we'll also show you this. We will run the 12400 CPU both in stock mode, and Ruud will also show you the package power of the CPU. And later on in overclock mode, we will do the same, so you can see a bit of the difference, what you can expect when running it stock and when running it overclocked.
So Artist 90K, so we need a better power supply unit for this. While for the i5, I don't think so, because the
it's still
power
not very
increase
extreme.
Is not that much. We will show you in the demo.
But let's go to this camera. You can see the liquid cooler that we're using. This is a 120 millimeter liquid cooling. Yeah. So it's a Core Liquid 120R. So this is not very big.
RGB doesn't work, so.
It's not very big, and the overclock we will perform today, you can also do this if you have like a decent tower model air cooler or something like that. Yeah. It's not anything close to, for example, overclocking a 12900K or anything like that. You can still, with relatively moderate cooling, you can still get a decent performance upgrade when you're using, for example, the 12400 that we're using. Of course, this is different if you're running a 12900. So even if it's a non-K, the i9 will show higher power consumption than the i5 will. And the i3 model will be even more efficient than the i5 that we're using today. So it really depends on the model that you're using. But the i5, that we believe is a bit of the sweet spot with this specific motherboard, that one runs perfectly well under a 120 millimeter liquid cooler, or just a moderate sized tower air cooler will also function fine. Yeah. So Ruud, let's maybe go to your system. Yeah. Maybe first you can tell a little bit about what you're using today.
Today we're using the i5 12400 with two 8GB sticks of memory, DDR4 3600 Castle latency 16 from G-Skill, and we're using an RTX 3070 Ti Supreme X graphics card and a M480 SSD, and power supply is a A850 GF from MSI,
which is a bit overkill right now.
And the cooler you already mentioned is the Core Liquid 120R. I think I covered most, right? Yeah.
Interesting to mention, you also tested with some other GPUs. I believe you tested a 3050, 3060, 3060 Ti, and this 3070 Ti. Later on, we will show some overviews because there are some differences there. Yeah.
When I'm asked to do a demo, I try to make something to show nicely on camera on the demo, and at first you will just pick some components and then start testing, and sometimes the results are wow, and sometimes they are not so wow, or there's no benefit, and that's how we pick the parts that we show in the demo. But before we have the demo and all the results ready, sometimes we need to test a lot of stuff, and sometimes it's just interesting for ourselves and we test more than is necessary for the demo. So we gather a lot of information, and since this one, this is a new platform showing some great results, I tested more than necessary.
So yeah, later on, because you did gather all those results, put it in a nice graph, and later on we will show you also where those differences are. Because Ruud already mentioned, in certain situations it's really like wow. In other situations, it can also be underwhelming what kind of extra performance you get out of it. And we will show you when you will benefit most and when you won't really benefit. BlackRock is asking, will B660 be compatible with 13th gen? No idea. That's up to Intel if they're going to do that. Are they going to launch 13th gen? Maybe they're going for something completely else.
Maybe 14th.
Yeah, maybe they skip 13th. In many countries, it's bad luck, right? 13th. Yeah,
exactly.
But yeah, of course, cannot comment yet whether or not Intel will support future series on the current generation. So that's up to Intel and remains to be seen. Let's get into your demo because you've got quite some interesting stuff to show.
Yeah. First, I've set it up as a default system. So it's just BIOS default and XMP profile 1 loaded. Actually, there's only one XMP profile, so that's the one.
So this is just the out-of-the-box experience without overclocking,
Yeah,
but with
exactly,
XMP enabled.
I haven't changed anything in the BIOS except for the XMP button, and I advise everyone to do so when they get a new system, because that will give you the correct memory speeds. This is the overview. So it's a 12400, and it's running at the default speeds. Normally, if you do all core loads, then it will run at 4 gigahertz, and that should be the normal clock in, for example, Cinebench or other all-core workloads. Motherboard here is the MSI B660 MORTAR Max Wi-Fi DDR4. They're not getting any shorter, the names, unfortunately. The BIOS is still a very bad one, so yeah, it is what it is. So it already works quite well with overclocking, so no issues there. I asked them if we can do some other automatic settings, but some are too complicated to do. So we have to set the memory speeds manually. I will show you in the BIOS later on. And the GPU is a RTX 3070 Ti Supreme X. Well, the X doesn't show on the HW Info 64, but you can trust me, it's the X version I'm using.
See, question from GigaRAM. Is that tiny 120mm cooler okay for that CPU?
Yeah, it's perfectly fine for stock, but also overclocked.
Yeah, for this i5, that is.
Yeah, for the i5 12400, no problem. Actually, all i5s, even up to 12600, if you run it stock, is fine. Yeah. Because I believe it goes up to 117 watts, the 12600K, with default speeds, and non-AVX workloads like Prime 95 or OCCT stress test, AIDA stress test, stuff like that, because that stresses the AVX units in the Intel a lot more than on AMD, for example, and then the power consumption also shoots up ridiculously. But that's only on Intel and only with those type of workloads. Yeah, memory 3600 C16, configured as the XMP profile dictates, and the M480 2 terabyte. That's what is shown here.
And this DDR4 frequency will automatically increase with the CPU frequency, right? When you increase the base clock.
Yes, if you don't, that's what I asked our BIOS engineers, if it would be possible if you increase the base clock, that it would choose the correct speed for your memory if you have XMP enabled. That seems to be a complicated part that's not implemented yet, and they think it's hard to implement, so probably will not be implemented, because they trust that people who are into overclocking also want to fiddle around a little bit in the BIOS, I guess.
So it could be that if you overclock your CPU and your memory increases, that it will not properly run the XMP profile anymore, because basically you're running it outside of the standard XMP spec of the module.
Yeah. It will basically increase the memory by as much as you will set the base clock.
Yeah. So in certain situations, you will maybe manually need to adjust your memory timings or anything like that in case your modules cannot run it anymore.
If you go for over 5% increase, then probably you will need to adjust the memory speed. Yeah. That's also what we're gonna do. Okay. First, I'm gonna just show you the speeds. What kind of performance we get out of this setup with the stock speeds, and then show you later on with the overclocked, and we should be able to get some nice improvements there.
So Cinebench, this is like purely the calculation power of the CPU.
Yeah, it scales really well with the amount of cores you have, and also with frequency. So this is used by a lot of media also to gauge how fast is this system, or how fast is the CPU. It's a pure CPU load, no GPU load at all. You can also choose to render on the GPU. Usually that's also a little bit faster. This one is used for benchmarking a lot. As you can see, current power consumption is about 80 watts, give or take, and the CPU temperature is only 47 degrees. So this cooler is more than capable of cooling 80 watt CPU. Actually, an Intel box cooler should be fine for this kind of thing. If you start overclocking, then the box cooler probably won't be able to
and that one is not designed to overclock the CPU.
But just a decent, like most tower coolers, air coolers, they can already dissipate about 150 watts. Most of them in a well-ventilated case, so should be okay. So default speeds for Cinebench on this system with HW info running in the background is about 12,267 points. So let's make a screenshot because I always forget, and we have to.
It's good brain training to remember everything.
Yeah, I know, but the computer is better at remembering than me, so screenshots are helpful. Cinebench is one of the things we want to show, but also gaming. If you're into fast gaming, then you probably know Rainbow Six Siege. Let's start that one up. Will take a while.
So Siege is not an extremely demanding game?
No, graphically not that demanding. I can also run the afterburner thing in the background. Maybe influences the performance a little bit, not that much, I think.
And because it's like a bit of an esports title and it's not very demanding graphically, it will usually, in theory, scale quite well when you increase your CPU performance, right?
Yeah, exactly, because the GPU is not the bottleneck, then most of the time it's the CPU or the memory or the cache or whatever. So this game scales really well with faster cores, not with many cores. Usually that doesn't help in games like this.
So maybe up to like 4 or 6 cores it may make a difference, but when you go beyond, you don't really see a difference anymore.
Probably won't see it in these games. This is also a little bit of an older game. So most older games are not optimized for multi-threading beyond 6 cores. Let's put it on the other side.
And just for reference, this is a 6-core CPU that we're using.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that also means that if you would, for example, use the i7 version, which is an 8-core CPU, then you won't really see a very big difference in terms of performance in games. Specifically this game, for example, doesn't utilize those extra cores.
Yes. It was still at 4K resolution. And then the GPU is more of a bottleneck than the CPU. So we're running at 1080p and ultra settings, overall quality, and just running the benchmark.
And ultra settings basically means that if you would put it lower, the difference would probably be even bigger if you have more CPU performance.
It doesn't really matter that much. So the quality settings are not really that much load on the GPU, I would say. As you can see, the CPU is running at 4 gigahertz and about 40 watts, I would say. GPU is only running at 80%, so it draws about 200 watts. If you would fully load the GPU, it would probably draw about 280 watts.
See, Edwin K is putting something in chat, and that's actually something that I still needed to discuss with Ruud. Edwin says, can you do a clinic about undervolting Core i7 Ryzen 5 because the heat of summer is coming? I didn't talk to you about this yet, Ruud, but this was exactly the plan I had for something in the coming months, to do maybe a dedicated live stream about underclocking and undervolting. So Ruud, if you're up for it, I see that we already have one viewer.
Well, yeah, well, we did kind of a thing like that with the 12900KS.
Yeah, we touched a bit on it indeed.
Because the simple fact was that the KS was not, we couldn't cool it to reach the maximum speed all the time because it just went to 100 degrees.
Basically, it maxed out a very high-end 360mm all-in-one liquid cooler.
Exactly, yeah. That's why we did some undervolting. and then you can draw a little bit more performance out of it, because it would take longer before it reached 100 Celsius. So yeah.
But yeah, if Ruud is up for it, Edwin, then we will prepare a little bit in the upcoming time for a live stream about this. I think we can, for example, also focus a bit on small form factor system where you have like limited cooling capacity, energy optimization as well, where it can make a difference. Maybe we can also take a look at, for example, for AMD, the curve optimizer. That will, in certain situations, also give you lower power consumption and even higher clocks. So we've got a few interesting things to look at there. So
yeah, but it will take some preparation as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But yeah, stay tuned for that one.
Yeah.
Ruud is positive about it, so then I'm also positive that in the coming months we will do a dedicated live stream about this.
Yeah, yeah, and also with energy increasing in price, so a little bit of undervolting might never hurt your wallet. So the result is 399 frames per second. Not sure.
Did you already take a screenshot?
It's saved automatically, so
okay.
we can always recall it.
Good.
And the minimum frame is are 327, but we can compare them side by side, or if you remember them, that's also fine. Another game that is with less high FPS is Far Cry 6, and we can also run that. Maybe the afterburner and the OSD part might influence the FPS a little bit, especially on Rainbow Six Siege, since that every little bit of performance will show on that kind of high FPS game.
Y2K for Live's asking, what will be stronger in the future, AMD or Intel? Time will tell.
Yeah, that's always interesting to see how things develop.
Yeah. And even right now, for example, when you compare the 5000 series to 12th gen Intel Core, it's hard to say which one is better. Like raw speed, I would say Intel at this point, but of course 12th gen is slightly newer than AMD 5000 series. But on the other hand, the 5000 series are a bit more efficient. So it's not really like there is one clear winner. It's really situational. What is the best option right now?
Yeah. Yeah, the efficiency part also helps AMD for the laptops.
Yeah. But also I'm running a very small mini ITX system, like 7 liters.
Mm-hmm.
I specifically chose for AMD because it's easier for me to cool.
Yeah.
With, for example, the 12400 that we're using today, that would also be possible quite easily. But if you're going higher end, like for example when you're running a 12 core or something like that, it becomes harder to cool it for the Intel side. So performance wise, they're really good if you can cool them. But once you go smaller, then it can give the edge to AMD, for example. Whereas when you have the space to cool it, Intel can be the better option for you. So yeah, it's not really like there is like one size fits all right now in terms of CPUs.
Okay, so we're running at the 1080p, and we're choosing ultra settings again. And let's start the benchmark, see what it does.
Manus says Intel efficiency pretty good considering the performance. It also depends a little bit which exact CPU you're talking about. For example, the 12900KS, in terms of performance, it's a total beast. But in terms of efficiency, it's by no means as efficient as, for example, the 12400 that we're using right now.
No.
So it's really at a certain point you will see for performance increase, but it will be diminishing returns when you take a look at the efficiency. For example, if you have an i7, it will already be significantly more efficient than an i9. But yeah, of course, the i9 will give you a slight edge in terms of performance.
Yeah. I think that especially for gaming, Intel has done a great job with the 12th gen. I think power consumption for gaming, the CPU part, that power consumption isn't huge, isn't a big deal, especially compared to graphics cards these days. So the power efficiency on games is a non-issue for Intel and also for AMD. But for rendering or the heavy loads, that will, yeah, the efficiency is still in favor of AMD. Oh, sorry, I need to move it. So the result is 114 frames per second on average, with the minimums of 90. I saw that the graphics card was also loaded around 82%, so not the highest, not a full load for the GPU by any means. And CPU was running at 4 gigahertz. I forgot to see where the power consumption of the CPU lied at that time. We can see it in HW info when we close this. Make a screenshot, close it, we'll see what the power consumption of the CPU was. Okay, it's about the same, it's about 40 watts. So let's show you how to overclock this CPU on this motherboard. Therefore, we need to go to the BIOS.
Yes, I see Artist 90K is asking about future, can we get a regular software update? What kind of software do you mean exactly? Do you mean like MSI Center software? Do you mean BIOS update? Or?
Okay, the driver update.
The driver for what?
I will try to go to the BIOS. We do have a capture card and a monitor attached, and sometimes they don't play nice. And oh, actually, it's not showing on either, or sometimes it's showing on both. Or
yeah, it's difficult to capture a BIOS, but
yeah. And if it doesn't work, I need to unplug the display port. But in our first test, it worked, and it showed on the capture card. So actually, now it's showing here on my monitor. Hang on. I need to unplug, restart. Is it restarting? Then press.
Partnership guy says, I'm very glad MSI partnered with EK. Yeah, we're actually partners with EK for quite a long time. Already had some nice products, both first already in GPU department. We had our Seahawk EK cards, and now we have some very nice motherboards with the monoblocks in there. So yeah, it's been a very good and long-lasting partnership with EK already that we have.
Okay, so this is the BIOS screen, or at least the advanced menu. There's also an easy menu. You can switch with pressing F7. For overclocking, you need to go to the advanced menu. That's this one. And you can go to the OC tab. And the magic happens. I'll use a keyboard. And the magic happens over here. So the CPU base clock, you can enter a number here, and that is also the percentage, since it's 100% is 100 megahertz. So we're going to use 125 megahertz, and then it will say BIOS will toggle to an old version of microcode that allows base clock overclocking. So just press yes, and it will do so. You can also switch here, but it will do that automatically. So the next thing you might want to do is make sure that the CPU runs at the maximum core ratio. And for this CPU, as we saw it running at 4 gigahertz all core, we're going to use 40, so 40 times 125 megahertz. That reaches the 5 gigahertz that is shown there as adjusted CPU frequency. So if I go down a little bit, with every overclock you also need to increase the power, but first we're going to check the DRAM frequency. Where is it? I'm looking at a different monitor than my own. So here you can see that adjusted DRAM frequency is now set to 4500. Well, that's a bit high for a 3600 kit. So
because it will increase in the same ratio as you're overclocking the CPU.
Yeah, so I asked them, is it possible to make this automatic so it will switch to around or about the speed rated at the XMP, so 3600 in this case? And they said it's complicated. So with this BIOS and probably with the future BIOSes, you still need to adjust this manually. But you only have to do it once, so it's not a big deal. And then we also go to the core voltage. I'll scroll up a little bit, and here's the core voltage, and I'll put in 125. That's the voltage that was working very well for me. I saw also that Hardware Unboxed was using a much higher voltage and a higher base frequency. For this CPU, it didn't go well with any higher base clocks, and I stopped at 1.35 volts.
And this really depends also on the CPU about what you can reach, right? It can differ from CPU to CPU, how high you can get with it. Yeah. As it always is with overclocking, basically. Yeah. Also on case queues, but one CPU is never identical to the other.
We did a lot of demos, and also we also tried internally to overclock, for example, i9s since the 7th generation was still i7 then, but we always try to do the highest case queue overclocking, and in this case you will get 25% increase. I mean, it's been a long time since we got 25% overclock working this well. So let's see how it goes. So what for the rest, you don't have to do anything, just save and exit, and then go to the Windows and benchmark some more.
ACM Venom says, yeah, WiFi bins are all different. Yeah, indeed. It also depends where exactly on there it was produced. So yeah, it can differ from CPU to CPU. But it looks, indeed, like Ruud already mentioned, the percentage of overclock that you can get on, for example, a 12400 in general is really high compared to what you see on modern CPUs. Yes, where it's cut, center is the best. That's correct. The more on the side, in general, performs less well than closer to the center. VRK says, why overclocking a non-K? Any benefits?
Yeah, 25%.
Yeah.
Should be, give or take.
25% clock increase.
Yeah, the clock increase is 25%. Let's see if we can also get 25-ish percentage performance increase. So first, sorry, I will use this one.
And basically the reason why you would want to do this is that you can get really good performance out of a very affordable CPU.
Yeah. This is the integrated one. There's not much to see here that it's still the 12400. The only difference is that the active clock, the bus, seems to switch to 125 megahertz. That's also exactly what we said in a BIOS. And at the moment it's running at 5 gigahertz. But it's set to dynamic overclocking. So you'll still have, in idle, you will get, instead of 400 megahertz, you will get 500 megahertz clocks when you're not doing anything or when the CPU is not loaded. It will take a while before it goes into the longer idle and 400 megahertz.
Maestro says for science. Well, this is not only for science. This is something you can do perfectly well at home.
Yeah, this is perfect for 24/7 overclocking. Why? Because you can use the standard cooling.
Very often we do stuff on this live stream just because we can, but this is not one of them.
So any case CPU with like i9, i7, that's probably overclocking just for the fun of it, because it can do that only for a short while before it overheats. With this one, no problem at all. I will show you. And the memory is clocked a little bit higher, so it's at 1812, so 3625 DDR4. That's because of the ratios, and this was the closest we could get, or we could have chosen one lower, is also fine, but still running at C16. So now you can see that the active clock is dropping a little bit, and that's because Windows has settled and background processes have settled. Let's restart the HW info for the sensors page, so we can keep track of what the CPU is doing, so the clock speeds, and also the power and the temperatures. So yes, the power will go up and the temperatures will go up, but also the performance should go up considerably. Yeah.
ViewStar89 is already saying, but is it worth the power consumption increase, I wonder? Well, we're going to show you right now. You remember the power consumption of the stock settings?
Yeah, it was about 80 watts. So yeah, this will increase. Yeah. So it's now about 127. Yeah. 29. Yeah.
So it's like 45, 50 watts higher than it was at stock. So yes, you do of course see.
Yeah, you will lose power efficiency. That's for sure. Yeah, but that's always
it's
the case
always with overclocking.
With overclocking. Yeah. And this isn't that big of a deal.
No, because this you can still easily cool. So 130 watt is like basically any all-in-one liquid cooler can handle this. Even if you would run this under a 92 millimeter all-in-one liquid cooler, you would be able to do it. We're using a 120 today. Also, just any decent tower cooler can also properly cool this.
And this is fully loaded. So yeah, you can see all cores with 5 gigahertz and about 128-ish, so 48 watts more than stock.
Dorian Seeker says, does the CPU still reduce clocks at idle?
Yeah.
Yes, it does, but as we mentioned, it will, for example, when you have the stock clocks, it will go all the way down to 400 megahertz.
Yeah.
Right now, it will go down to 500 megahertz, and that, of course, has to do with the adjustment in the base clock that we made.
Yeah, that's the bus clock difference, yeah. So now it's 15,438 points, so that's not bad at all. I forgot, so I'm just gonna use this. Hey, there's only 2 screenshots. We should have. Oh no, the Rainbow Six Siege is a HTML file. Okay.
ACM Venom says 50% more power draw for 25% faster CPU.
Basically, yes.
Yeah. Well, 25% higher frequency. That it doesn't translate into 25% more performance in every situation. That's really dependent.
In this benchmark, usually it's close.
Yeah, in this benchmark it is. Yeah.
I can just calculate it because I always use this instead of my mind. So 15, 4, 3, 8.
But yeah, in general it is like that with
5.
Overclocking. If you look at the efficiency,
6, 7,
it will always suffer under overclocking.
Actually, it's more. That's cute. It's 25.8% faster. So we get a bonus.
So in Cinebench, it scales perfectly well.
Yeah, this is actually.
But also
it's better than perfect.
Your memory is a tiny bit higher. Yeah. Well, in Cinebench, it doesn't matter that much.
It doesn't matter that much. No.
And it's also only like 25 megahertz difference right now.
Yeah, maybe, I have no idea, but if you run it 10 times, maybe average it would still be 25 or something.
Artist 90K is asking what is the minimum PSU you would need if you use a 3060? It won't be that high. A 3060 is not that power hungry. I believe it's like 180 watts.
Yeah, close to 200, I guess.
Yeah, so with a
3060 or Ti?
I would say if you have like a decent 500 watt power supply, you can easily run this 12400 overclocked with a 3060.
Yeah. I think 450 is even good enough.
Yeah.
But it all depends on the quality, of course.
Yeah, like a decent quality 450 would be okay. I would go for 500 just to be safe, probably.
Yeah. Shall we try the Rainbow Six Siege?
I see ACM Venom and VRK are talking about 650 watt. That will be overkill.
Yeah.
You can do it, of course,
but it's also fine. If you have that lying around, just use that one. Yeah.
Even with other stuff, it won't consume that much.
Yeah.
I'm, for example, also running a 3060 in my own system with a 5600X, and I'm running at a 450 watt power supply.
Yeah, I think most cases 450 for 3060 is fine.
ACM Venom says it depends on the CPU also. Yeah, it very much depends on the CPU. So we were specifically talking about like the combination of this 12400 overclocked with 3060.
There are some reviewers, they calculate just the GPU power and then just add the CPU power and some percentage overhead, so you will have some room left. Okay, let's start the Rainbow Six Siege. The previous result was 399, so let's see if we can beat that. Would be a bummer if it didn't, but in my previous testing it did.
Partnership guy 299 says, as long as you can cool it down, shoot for maximum power. Depends a bit whether or not you have to pay your own electricity bill. A while ago, we actually did some demonstrations with the 12900KS together with an RTX 3090 Ti, and we were able to get it over 1000 watt power consumption.
Yeah,
with
but that
a
was
single
more
GPU.
Like, yeah, how far can we push it on the wall meter? Yeah, well, it was fun to do. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were stress testing it, but we were not even overclocking those parts.
No. But it dropped down because the CPU overheated. And
yeah. So it basically thermal throttled at a certain point.
Error. We don't need connection. We just need the benchmark. So display still 1080p. Graphics still at ultra. Run the benchmark. So the CPU power was 40 watts when we run it at stock speeds. Of course, it will be a little bit higher now. But if your CPU is running like this, like 60 watts, I don't think an i9 will run at 60 watts with this this kind of spec. Might get some more FPS though.
Anke says, get some kills, dude. This is more of a benchmark and not really a gamer.
Yeah. I'm in the old days with Doom and Quake and Wolfenstein. That was my days of playing games.
Quake is still one of my favorites.
Lately, I'm just I played with some colleagues though, and usually I'm the one who got shot. So
you need those people as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. You need also victims, right?
Exactly. So if I remember correctly, the previous test was
399.
What was it? 399 on average?
On average, yeah.
Yeah.
Something like 327. So that's a nice increase, right? 100 FPS.
And this is by just overclocking the CPU.
Yeah.
GPU still identical clocks.
And the minimum FPS is 418. So that's also an increase of 90.
So the minimum FPS is higher than the average FPS on stock speeds.
And that's in high FPS gaming. And we saw quite similar results in CSGO as well.
So earlier VRK was asking, why would you overclock a non-K CPU? Well, this is why. Because more than 100 FPS extra.
When I started this demo or started testing for this demo, I first tested a 3050 and then I didn't see any massive gain, so I was okay, so in Cinebench we can get some performance, right? So then I switched the GPU to the 3070 Ti because we used that one with the 12700K and the Kingston stream. And then I saw this result and I was, whoa, that's a huge difference. And usually the CPU makes some difference in Rainbow Six Siege, but I was not expecting anything close to 20%. That was really
because this scales really well.
This scales amazingly, and probably we will have a sweet spot here. So it was perfect for this demo, of course, but I will show you that the results can also help you in other games. It's not just this one.
And of course, this also depends on the CPU you're using. Right now, we're using an i5. These results and also the extra percentage of performance you will get will differ if you, for example, put an i9 on this or an i7. Later on, we'll also show you some overviews comparing hardware Unboxed tested an i3, an i5, and an i7, for example. So I included some of their results. Later on, I will show you in the slides. Because in certain situations, you will be able to get more extra performance out of some CPUs than out of others.
Yeah. and it's not just this i5 and GPU combination. I tested more GPU combinations as well, and also different resolutions and more games than just the two I'm showing you now. But we'll give you the results as well. So we're not trying to only show you the best and hide the worst. That's not what we're after here. But we definitely want to show you one of the best experiences.
See, Shelby is experiencing some issues with onboard audio with multiple boards. Well, best to go indeed to MSI support with this, but I see that you had the same issue with an other board again. Personally, and I've used many motherboards, I've never had any onboard audio issues before. So if you have 2 in a row, maybe check the audio device that you're plugging into it.
Yeah.
Because that would be my guess that has an influence here, especially if you see that the second board gets the exact same issue, because it is really rare that the onboard audio all of a sudden stops. I've personally never experienced it.
We've had, yeah, it was a bit of a weird situation. The case came with the buses already installed in the micro ATX configuration. So the metal buses where you screw the motherboard on were on that position. So if you put a full ATX motherboard on, there's one bus touching the PCB where there's no hole in a full ATX motherboard. And that was causing an issue with the onboard audio as well. And that happened on several systems, but they were all using the same case. So once we figure that out, that something like that also happens once in a while. So I've set it up 1080p again, still the same, ultra settings, and press F5 for benchmark. Also, this one was running about 40 watts. I need to dug down a little bit.
Yeah, so also a slight increase.
Yeah, a slight increase is about 54, 55, something like that. And basically it means that the this is, I was going to up to 64 now. So the balance between if it's CPU bound or GPU bound is more towards the GPU now, I would say, than compared to, for example, Rainbow Six Siege. What was the result of this one? Do you remember 114 or something?
Oh yeah, I believe it was 114.
Yeah, we need to check the screenshot. Okay, move it to the left. Okay. 135, okay, screenshot.
Shelby, specifically because you had the same issue twice, I think you should look at the root cause.
Yeah. Screenshot.
So for example, like Ruud mentioned,
114.
The small distancers in the case that maybe damage it, or the audio device could be an issue.
So yeah, that's still 21 frames extra, which isn't bad at all. And also the minimum FPS has an increase of 26 FPS. And that's basically a free upgrade or free FPS. Well, you still need to pay the electric bill, but yeah, it's an easy 20 frames per second.
If you have enough solar panels, it could be free FPS in summer, maybe not in winter.
Yeah, but that's a massively good result in gaming, especially just for an upgrade for or for overclocking the CPU.
Artist 90K says 1440p. Later on we'll show you a bit of an overview, because we did tested different resolutions, also with different graphics cards.
Yeah.
So we will show you 1080p, 1440p and Ultra HD. But I can already tease a bit to you, the lower resolution you have, the more CPU bound a game will get. Because the higher the resolution, the harder you make it on your graphics card. So your graphics card will become the bottleneck earlier than the CPU in that situation. Yeah. So in general, the lower the resolution and the lower the settings, the bigger impact a faster CPU has. So also the bigger impact overclocking your CPU has.
Yeah. So in idle, it's just running like 4 or 5 watts. So if you're not using the CPU, even in overclock mode, it doesn't consume tons of energy. So
let's maybe pick a few winners for our giveaway. So if you haven't participated yet, go to msi.com/2/insider. Or if you're watching on YouTube or Twitch, you can also follow the direct link that our bot should put in the chat once every 5 minutes. I hope it does right now, because I saw some people weren't experiencing that. We have our first winner here. Ruud, you can announce it.
It's DK.
DK, congratulations. Yeah. You won our first game code for Rainbow Six Extraction. We just tested Siege, so I always have to think, no, it's not Siege. Rainbow Six Extraction. And let's do some more winners right away. Drawing. The honor is all yours, Ruud.
Soulmate.
Congratulations. You also won a game code for Rainbow Six Extraction.
And Zuki.
Zuki, congratulations to you as well. You also won a game code for Rainbow Six Extraction. So please keep an eye out on your mailbox. Then we will email the code to you in the coming days with some instructions on how to redeem it. Ruud, let's maybe dive into some of the results from your testing, because you also tested with another CPU for comparison.
Yeah.
So we have now seen the increase in Cinebench. We have seen the increase in both Rainbow Six Siege and Far Cry 6. Mm-hmm. But you tested all of those games and benchmarks with both stock overclocked i5, but also with the i7 12700K, and also with the 12700K using DDR5.
Yeah, the results of the 12700K that came from the live stream of Kingston. So we compared the DDR4 with the DDR5 6000 kit. Mm-hmm. So that's what's showing in the top two bars.
So here you can already see that for Cinebench, it doesn't really matter whether you're using DDR4 or DDR5, right?
No, for Cinebench, memory is not that important. No.
So it's mostly just how fast is the CPU?
Yeah.
And memory?
It's all cores, yeah. Cores and cache maybe a little bit, but yeah.
But where you do see a big gap is the higher clock speed. So overclocking a CPU here, big difference.
Yeah, so basically going from 4 GHz to 5 GHz all core clock, then this gives you the results. It's pretty close to what we saw here on the screen as well.
But what we also see here is that the 12700K still clearly outperforms an overclocked i5.
It's massively faster in rendering, and that's because it has more cores and both efficiency cores and performance cores. So 2 more performance cores and 4 efficiency cores.
Because this one only has 6 performance cores and no efficiency cores. So this is really like a 6-core CPU, 12 threads. Yeah. Whereas the 12700K has both P cores and E cores.
Yeah, and power consumption of the 12700K is also a bit higher.
Yeah. Then let's take a look at another benchmark you did, which is Handbrake.
Yeah, I used Handbrake for X264 and X265 transcoding, and basically it's closing the gap already with the i7. So the 12400 overclocked to 5 GHz is pretty close to the 12700 on DDR4. So here DDR5 does matter, especially the faster one, and especially on X264. That seems to benefit memory speed a lot.
Farah is saying compare 12400 to 12600K. Unfortunately, we don't have this testing data for.
Yeah, I also wanted to do that, but I don't have it. So
no, we don't have the CPU on hand, unfortunately.
No.
But you can do like an educated guess where it would land. And if we're, for example, looking at this, you know that usually the 12600K would be like between the 12400 and the 12700K. But we can already see that when you overclock the 12400, in this test, it gets awfully close to the 12700 already. Yeah. So I expect in this test, if you would compare it to a 12600K, that it will be at least on par with the 12600K. And maybe the overclocked 12400 would even slightly outperform it. That would be my educated guess. Do you agree, Ruud?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, especially on the transcoding part, it seems to be also thread limited, so it cannot use unlimited amount of threads to speed up. And especially the X264 is less well optimized for multi-threading than the X265. So that's what you're seeing here. More cores will definitely benefit X265 better, but also to a certain point. So if you go like 32 cores, then you won't see any difference anymore.
Yeah.
We saw that with the Threadripper parts.
Then let's take a look at gaming. Start with Rainbow Six Siege. And here you can also see that for the 12700K, it doesn't really matter where you use DDR4 or DDR5.
No.
In gaming, well, it's like within margin of error. The i7 is still faster than the overclocked i5 in this situation. But where we see the massive gap, of course, like we also saw in the demonstration, because we just tested this title, you see like a huge increase going from the 12400 to the 12400 overclocked.
Yeah.
So this one is even slightly higher than the result we just got, but I think that has to do also that we're running OSD and stuff.
Yeah,
I think we went from
part,
399 to 5.
We went to 503 or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it lost about 40 FPS. Yeah. Yeah. But what we demonstrated was both with OSD. So yeah, it's still apples to apples, but not apples to this apple.
And Weird Seed is asking, with the mic, hello from Marcus, what is your train of thought of going outside to buy the latest hardware on the market if there is 0 games to play and 0 everything you desire? Then why would you buy the hardware? It only makes sense to buy it right if you're going to utilize it with something. That would be my train of thought.
I don't understand the question exactly. 0 everything you desire. Yeah. I would buy the cheapest one, I guess.
Yeah.
If you can't use it, then spend as less money as you can. Yeah. So
it's like buying an expensive car and not driving it.
Yeah. Then I would draw a car.
Yeah, probably.
Not buy one.
Gary's saying, I would love to get an i9, but I've been with AMD since Opteron 170. I really want to get a Ryzen or a Threadripper Pro. It depends a bit on what you want to do with it, of course. Like if you're not going to do heavy rendering or anything, and if your focus is on gaming, then it makes no sense to get a Threadripper Pro, because in single core performance it will be even lower than, for example, the i9 or the Ryzen 5000 series on AM4. So I would definitely not recommend it if you want to game on it. If you want to do rendering stuff, then a Threadripper Pro can be very interesting. Also Ryzen, like the 5950X, 5900X are very good at rendering workloads as well. So is the i9, by the way. It's also really quick in that.
Yeah, really quick. Yeah.
Let's go to our next game, Far Cry 6.
Yeah, we also saw that one.
Yeah, here we saw indeed the increase as well from 12400 to 12400 overclocked.
Yeah.
Here you also see that the i5 12400 overclocked gets pretty close to a stock 12700K, which is a significantly more expensive CPU.
Yeah.
And yeah, slight increase on the DDR5 compared to the DDR4 and 12700K, but nothing significant, I would say. So for gaming purposes in general, it doesn't make a huge difference. Some titles do benefit a little bit from it, but
I think we saw Watch Dogs. I think we used Watch Dogs in that demo.
Yeah.
For it responded well to memory. DDR5 speeds. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Then let's maybe take a look at some of the testing results from Hardware Unboxed. So we also sent a sample of this specific motherboard, so the MAG B660 and MORTAR Max Wi-Fi DDR4, to the guys from Hardware Unboxed. And they also did some extensive testing with it, and they did not only use the 12400 that we're using today, but they also put a Core i3 and a Core i7, both non-K models, on there. And that also shows some interesting insights, I think. So let's first take a look at their Cinebench R23 results, and this is on single core. So basically what you see here is that they overclocked it to 5.1 gigahertz.
Yeah.
And because they're all based on the same architecture, basically the single core performance at the same frequency, it doesn't matter if it's i3, i5 or i7, you will basically get the same score.
Yeah. So there you also have it that the cache size doesn't matter for Cinebench R23.
Yeah. The reason why you do see differences when running them at stock between i3, i5, i7 is that the stock clock speeds are slightly different. So the i3 is a bit lower clocked than the i5, and i5 slightly lower clocked than the i7. So that's why you see the slight increase at the stock speeds. But if you're all locking them at 5.1 gigahertz, they score identical in the single core benchmark of Cinebench. But when, of course, looking at the multi-core score of Cinebench, this is completely different, because this is where all the extra cores come in. And the i3 has fewer cores than i5, and i5 has fewer than i7. So here you really see the increase when going to processors with more cores. But still, you also see quite an interesting increase on the same CPU when you overclock it. So for the i3, from 8.5K to 10.5K, i5 12.5K to almost 14.8. So quite significant increase as well in the multi-core performance.
I'm not sure why they chose 5.1 also on the 12700K, the 700s on the, without a K.
Maybe for comparison's sake, because they did the same
I
with
think so, but yeah. Also, maybe they were interested in the cache size difference, or what kind of results the cache size made.
Faraz is asking, is this an all-core overclock?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But with this i5, the maximum all-core multiplier it has is 40. That's the maximum you can get. So yes, you can increase the bus clock or the base clock, but the 40 is the maximum, is the ceiling, because that's what the all-core ratio is as a maximum. It's not unlocked, so I cannot go to 41. So with the 12700, you probably can go up. I'm not sure, 4.6 or something, I guess. Yeah, Intel's not listing the all-core clocks anymore. That's a bit annoying. They only say this is the maximum boost, but yeah, okay, single-threaded boost. I can look up, but I cannot see the all-core clocks. I do have it somewhere in my.
I see Guidus is saying, I can only fathom the cooking for that. Won't the i3 run harder than the i7, even though the scores are similar? If you overclock both the i3 and the i7, for example, to 5.1 gigahertz, usually the i3 would run a bit cooler. The power consumption will be a bit lower because it has fewer cores.
Yeah.
So I expect it to run cooler and run more efficient than the i7 at the same frequency, for the simple fact that it has fewer cores. Asian Venom says multi-core on top. Yes, this is the multi-core one. So here you see the single core one. There you see that basically they score identical when they're clocked identical. And here with the multi-core, you see, of course, the increase for the CPUs with more cores. Then let's take a look at 7-zip. They also tested this. This is a compression benchmark. And here, I think it's very interesting that you see the increase for the i3 and the i5 is relatively high, even very high. Like specifically looking at the i5 here is like 50K to 66K. That's a huge increase. And here you see that the benefit of overclocking the i7 is not as much as it is for the i5 and i3. This of course differs per benchmark, but you see that in certain situations you get more out of the overclock for an i3 or an i5 than you get out of an i7. Yeah. So in theory I would say these overclocks will benefit you more with a lower end CPU than with a higher end. Yeah. Probably they didn't test this with an i9, but probably if you would put a 12900 on this, so non-KSQ i9, the differences will be even a bit smaller than for the i7.
Yeah. Also, i7 overclocking will be a little bit trickier because you have the P cores and the E cores, and you need to set them. Yeah, probably also you have to test them separately. So, what multiplier are you going to choose is probably also going to take a little bit of testing and trial and error.
Yeah, so the i3 and the i5 are a bit more straightforward.
Yeah,
they're like
they only have P core, so just
it's more like an old school CPU, whereas the i7 is like this new kind of hybrid architecture, like a bit like Big Little almost.
Yep.
Mr. Mide is asking, do you still need to readjust RAM speeds when you overclock the base clock?
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's what we showed. You can also watch this video back on YouTube later.
Yeah, indeed, because your RAM will go with your base clock. So if you, like we for example did, we did a 25% overclock from on the frequency of the CPU. So it went from 4 gigahertz to 5 gigahertz. If you do the same on your RAM, so that would lead you some quick math. 3600 is like the default we're running. So 25% of 3600 is 900. 3600 plus 900. Then you would run your memory modules at 4500 megahertz.
Very good. Yeah.
That is not very.
Calculator.
Yeah. Huh?
I used calculator.
Oh, you used calculator. Yeah. You cheated.
Yeah. But we also saw that in the BIOS. BIOS showed adjusted memory frequency, and that went also to 4500.
Yeah, I didn't properly pay attention, but yeah, some math works.
I double checked, and that's exactly the 25% you will get. Yeah.
Yeah. So and like the most DDR4 3600 kits cannot easily run 4500 megahertz, especially not when running the same timings. So if you just enable XMP, if you increase your base clock, it will still run the same timings for your memory modules. So the XMP profile, for example, of the G.Skill modules that we're using today, they are running CL16. That same DDR4 3600 CL16 kit cannot run DDR4 4500 CL16. You maybe, I'm not sure if this specific memory kit can even reach that speed, but if you want to reach it, you will need to fiddle around with the timings and set them looser. Mahir is asking, can I do the same thing on a cheap motherboard? Well, this is actually a relatively well, cheap is a big word, but it is a more affordable motherboard. So basically, this motherboard allows you to overclock while not having to buy a very expensive Z-series motherboard and KSQ CPU. So this is definitely one of the more affordable options for, well, I would say even the most affordable option for overclocking a 12th gen Intel Core processor. Cibriano Stud is saying, are we going to see your actual overclocking setting in the BIOS? We actually already did this. So I see you're watching on YouTube. I think you can even go back in time within the live stream. And then you can see the adjustments that it made in the BIOS. Yeah,
just go to the BIOS part and you will see it. Yeah, and we are explaining it there. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me see. Punisher says usually the i9s are already pushing the limits of silicon. Not much more can be squeezed out of it, especially if you're limited by your cooling capacity. Yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah. Like if you get a higher end processor, the headroom is not as much anymore as it will be with, for example, an i3 or an i5 that we're using today. So here the headroom of the
hardware Unboxed could have squeezed more out of the i7.
Yeah.
So that result is probably not the maximum it could get.
But yeah, you definitely, if you're running this higher end SKU, you will also need proper cooling with it.
Definitely, yeah.
Because they will consume significantly more power, especially comparing to these non-K i3 and i5s that do not have the additional E cores. The i7 and the i9, they do have them, and they will consume significantly more power. So like the 120mm cooler that we're using today, it will not be enough for an I think it would already not be enough for the i7 and definitely not enough for the i9.
No. But the maximum power of the i7 12700 is already 180 watts, so expect something close to that. That's the stock power. So if you're going to overclock it by 25%, and assuming that it's also going to need 50% more power, then you will be at 270 watts. And that's something that's very hard to cool already.
And just for comparison's sake, when we were running Cinebench with this 12400, it was on stock speed, it was 80 watts. And overclocked to 5 gigahertz, it was 130?
Well, yeah, close to 130,
yeah. So yeah, the i7 already does 180 on stock, so overclocking that.
I think that's about 55% increase. Yeah, that's a lot.
Let me see. Asian Venom says it's diminishing returns. Yeah, like overclocking, it depends a bit on how you look at it, but overclocking, if you look at the power consumption towards the performance gain you'll get, it's always diminishing returns. You will always have to put more power in it than what you will get back in extra performance. So basically, if you're going to do this, you will always make your CPU less efficient. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're aiming for maximum efficiency, this is not something you want to do. Then you want to look into undervolting, for example, or even underclocking could make it more efficient. Guidus is saying, will a sub 20 phase power delivery on a motherboard help to further push overclocking a CPU?
I think it means bigger than 20 phase.
Yeah, I think as well. No, at a certain point, especially when you're, for example, looking at these higher end SKUs, like these high end i9s, the VRM will not be the bottleneck anymore. Like these days, it's specifically how you can cool your CPU. So if you can cool your CPU properly, the VRM, especially on higher end motherboards, it will be able to handle it.
Yeah. This motherboard will easily go over 300 watts, no problem. This power supply, this VRM is
and this is still a mid-range motherboard, and it can already do that.
Yeah, put a KS in it, and your CPU cooler will be choking before the VRM will.
Yeah. So even if you're running like a very high-end 360mm all-in-one liquid cooler, that will still run into its limits sooner than the VRM temperature on your motherboard will.
The VRMs are insane actually if you compare them to, like, say 5 years ago.
Simis is saying, bigger hot take, you should not mismatch your CPU and GPU so hard that you will have high gains for gaming.
Well, that's a part of it, but of course this is for demonstration. And I would agree that a 3070 Ti is probably not the GPU you're going to buy if you're just solely playing Rainbow Six Siege. But people will actually play it, and they might play it at higher resolution and higher settings. But this is pure to show you what is possible with an overclocked CPU and how much gains you can get. Of course, this is like a very good combo to show this difference, and we'll show you later on some less good or more GPU bound combinations, and then you will see that the overclocking doesn't matter that much in gaming. So I agree with that part. Yeah.
Let me see. Guidus also says lots have changed in the past 5 years. Yeah, like especially on the motherboard side, I would say like VRMs, they got overkill quite a lot nowadays. So in the past you really had to be careful, especially when running a higher end CPU on a mid-range motherboard. For example, if you had like a B series motherboard and you would put like a Core i9 on it, that would not be an ideal combination in the past. Nowadays, like even this B660 motherboard, it can easily run up to a Core i9. Cooling the Core i9 itself, that will be the challenge. It will not be a real challenge for the VRM on this board.
No. my here is updating and says, I was talking about MSI Pro B660M-G, but that's a motherboard that cannot overclock, and therefore the VRM is also not really suitable
indeed.
for overclocking.
Yeah, because this is like our, at least at this point, this is our only motherboard that comes with an external clock generator, and that is the specific thing you need on the motherboard to allow a B660 board to overclock your CPU, because the multiplier is locked on when you put a non-K CPU on a B series chipset, or also when you put a K CPU on a B series chipset. With a B series chipset, you cannot utilize an unlock multiplier.
No.
So that also means that if you want to do like extreme overclocking, setting records, then you will of course also need to have that unlock multiplier there. So then you would go to a K SKU CPU and a Z series motherboard, so Z690 in this situation. Something to also keep in mind, when you're doing this, you may void your warranty of your CPU, because it is a non-K CPU, so it's not meant to overclock with. So that is something to keep in mind. I don't know the exact guidelines from Intel, but it could very well be that they refuse warranty of your CPU when you did base clock overclocking with it. So if you do this, always be informed about that. There is always a risk in overclocking. Of course, you can make the risks bigger by increasing voltage a lot more. So I would always advise to
CPUs, but voltage does.
Yeah, voltage does. But yeah, keep in mind that it may void your warranty, because officially non-K CPUs are not meant by Intel to overclock with.
I think if Intel wants, they can investigate and tell if how much voltage it had run through it.
ACM Venom says even with K CPU, it's all at your own risk.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how Intel treats K SKU CPUs with their RMA process.
I don't think. Yeah, usually if you made a mistake and put like insane voltage on it, and all protections failed and it blew up, then usually you would not return it. So, or at least I wouldn't. Then I would just take my loss and say, okay, I made a mistake. It's my fault, right?
And basically, even though the K SKU may also not be officially covered in warranty, I don't know.
I haven't tried it. Yeah.
I could see Intel being more lenient towards K series CPUs than they would be when you overclock the hell out of a non-K CPU.
But that was speculation because we never tried it, and I've only come across like only a few CPUs that actually died.
Yeah.
And if they died, then there was probably a good reason for it to die. Probably I was the reason. No, I'm serious. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's mostly voltage, right?
Yeah, voltage. Yeah. Well, actually, in a few cases, I was testing our motherboards and the VRMs on our motherboards, and the motherboard's VRM died because of a wrong setting in the BIOS that was possible but shouldn't be possible, and that killed the VRM, but the VRM killed the CPU. So both were killed at the same time. So yeah, but I've never tried to RMA that CPU to Intel. Also because we got the CPU for free. So.
ACM Venom says, I don't think Intel will cover your K SKU CPU if you were doing extreme overclock with liquid nitrogen. No, in that situation, if you're really going to do the extreme overclocks, definitely not.
And maybe Intel thinks, okay, we've sold so many K SKUs and only so few came back. Maybe they just say, okay, that few, okay, just replace them and be done with it. I don't know. I have no idea how Intel treats that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we're just trying to warn you guys that overclocking always comes with a risk, and that it can also void your CPU warranty. So that's something to keep in mind.
But you're not buying directly from Intel, so probably you need to go back to the shop, and I have no idea how shops handle that kind of warranty questions.
Yeah, may also differ per shop.
Yeah.
Some may just swap it maybe, some may send it back to Intel first.
At least if there's no burn marks on them.
Yeah, and for example, some extreme overclockers also delete their CPU, stuff like that.
Of course, yeah.
If you're going to delete it, not a chance.
No.
You will get warranty.
No.
Not a single chance. Let's also take a look at some of the gaming results from Hardware Unboxed, because they also tested those with i3, i5, and i7.
Yeah.
So here we have some results of F1 2021. This is 1080p running the 3090 Ti. So this is a very high-end GPU, much higher end than we used in our testing. Here you also see that for the i3 and the i5, you see really big gains. For the i7, not as much.
Yeah.
That, of course, has to do with the fact that the i7 is already clocked higher by default, so there is not as much you can get out of it anymore when you run it at the same clock as you do with the other ones. But yeah, big increase for the i3 and the i9 here. Ruud, what would you say here? Is this more CPU or GPU bound, or a bit of a combination maybe?
I think it's mostly CPU bound, but to a certain point, of course.
Yeah. Not as much as, for
and
example,
it's also possible that the game doesn't scale that far higher than the 388 or whatever is listed there. So even if you would put like an i9 overclocked in, it might not get more out of it.
Yeah. I think what is quite interesting to see here is that an overclocked i3 is significantly faster than the stock i5.
Yeah.
So the stock i5 will give you an average frame rate of 275. An overclocked i3 will give you 330. That's a big increase on a cheaper CPU.
Yeah.
Asian Venom is asking, do people still lap their CPUs?
Some do, yeah.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say it's as common anymore as it used to be, but I also feel like CPUs are more flat nowadays and already better quality than in the past.
Actually, they're convex, not flat.
Yeah, okay.
And the problem with the Alder Lake one is because it's a bigger socket, so a bigger heat spreader, that it tends to bend a little bit, not that extreme, but it's like a big bulge on it, to exaggerate it a little bit. And if you put a water cooler or another cooler on it, that's this way. So those two bulges meet in the middle, and the contact will be in the middle.
Yeah.
So what, for example, Buildzoid did, if I understood it correctly, and also I think Igor from Igor's lab was investigating this, and they said they have lapped the cooling plate of their water cooler, so that's perfectly flat. And if you use that on a bulging CPU, that the contact wasn't as good as in previous generations. So what they try to do is let the Alder Lake CPU bend less, so that will also be a little bit more flat. And they put some washers underneath, or they had a certain bracket on it, so it would bend less. So the whole package of the CPU would bend less.
Because basically what you want to have is as much surface area that properly touches between CPU and cooler, because that will help with the heat dissipation. If the surface is smaller, it's harder to dissipate the heat because you have a smaller area to dissipate the heat through. Exactly.
Marius is asking, how to unbox clip 25% overclock can give 30% performance more. How is this possible? Actually, they set the base clock to 131, I believe. So they have a 31% overclock instead of the 25% we use. But they also increased the voltage a lot more than we did. So yeah, they're practically trying to squeeze more out of the i3 and the i5 than we are. Yeah. And but our power consumption is more reasonable, I would say, for 24/7.
So it depends a bit on what you want. Do you want to push it to the maximum, or do you want to still have a somewhat efficient CPU for 24/7 usage? Yeah. And it also depends on the quality of your CPU, because some CPUs may go further than others. Yeah.
And also with base clock overclocking, everything is increased. And so also the bus clocks for the memory, but also the rest will increase. And at a certain point, you're pushing it too far, and then it won't handle that correctly anymore.
Let's take a look at another title guys from Hardware Unboxed tested using these CPUs, and that's Cyberpunk. And Cyberpunk is known for being a very hard title on your GPU. So even they're running a 3090 Ti, so basically the highest end card you can get nowadays. And for the i7, you see that it's like already on stock speeds, it's completely GPU bound. So the 3090 Ti with Cyberpunk already becomes the limiting factor right here. So if you overclock an i7 here, while you were already getting the maximum out of it, out of your GPU on stock, so you don't see any increase here. So it's just the same. For the i3 and the i7, you do still see an increase. So there it does still make a bit of a difference. But yeah, here you really see that once you go more GPU bound, you really end up in situations where you may not see a difference at all.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind, especially with the higher end CPUs.
Of course, an i3 and a RTX 3090 Ti is way out of balance, I would say. So yeah, you would definitely have an i3 limiting as a limiting factor. Yeah.
The only situation where I could see someone, for example, combining an i5 with a 3090 Ti is if you're doing 4K gaming all the time of AAA titles. Because if you do 4K gaming with the latest AAA titles, it will become so GPU bound that the Core i7 or a Core i9 will not give you any benefit over a Core i5, for example.
Yeah, but still, if you're spending that much money on a GPU, then...
But then it's only...
Yeah, it's just for
the
feeling,
ID.
Right? It's just for your emotion that you think, I at least need an i7.
But it will not give you any more performance than the i5.
No.
Or the i9 will not give you any more performance than the i5, and it will cost more than twice as much.
But it will give you a better feeling.
Yeah. it sounds like a more logical combination, but that's also the counterintuitive part. The higher you go with your settings and your resolution, the lower end CPU you can essentially buy without it having any benefit.
Yeah, but still I would,
if you go higher.
Yeah, would recommend a 6-core or better.
Yeah, but like the i5 is already a 6-core.
Yeah.
So with an i5 on Ultra HD for these AAA titles, you will already get the maximum out of the 3090 Ti. Yeah. Then let's go completely to the other side, because they also tested Siege, one of the titles we tested as well. They also did it with the i3 and the i7, and this is very light on your CPU or your GPU. This is really like an esports title, and this one really benefits from a good single core performance on your CPU, and with overclocking you do increase that single core performance. And here, even with the i7, you still see a very big increase when overclocking it. So this, if the game is essentially lighter for your GPU, then you will also on the higher end CPUs still see it scale properly. In Cyberpunk for the i7, no difference at all, identical FPS. For Rainbow Six Siege, which is a much lighter game, there you will see a difference. And here, interesting to see as well that the i5, for example, significantly outperforms. If it's overclocked, it significantly outperforms the stock i7. And even more interesting, the overclocked i3 outperforms a stock i7 here. So that's, for these kind of games, it gives you a huge benefit to do some base clock overclocking on a non-K CPU.
Yeah, this game evidently doesn't need that many cores.
Yeah.
That's why the i3 churns out a lot of frames as well.
So especially if you're into esports titles, I think a combination like this motherboard with an i5 is perfect. Because it will scale really well with those lighter games. Of course, depending on the GPU you're using, but in general, it saves you a lot of money compared to a more expensive CPU on stock speeds, and it will run at least as fast, if not faster. Garish is saying, so better to get an i7 or i9 for your feelings, and in case the games you're gaming requires more CPU.
Well, an i7 and an i9 you can use for other things than gaming as well. So I don't say never get an i7 or an i9, but for gaming it's not what you need. But if you also do video editing or whatever, then the i5 and an i7 and an i9 will perform differently.
And especially when, for example, comparing this to non-K i3s and i5s, they don't have any E cores, zero.
Yeah.
It's only P cores.
Yeah.
Whereas the i7 and i9 always have additional cores. So the multi-core performance specifically will be much better on those CPUs. But for Ultra HD gaming, like AAA titles, you will not get extra FPS out of an i7 or i9 compared to an i5. Weird Seed is asking, speaking of overclock, personally, I will never be an enthusiast, but is it possible to overclock your power supply unit? No. It's not really something that runs with a frequency. Yeah, the frequency of the grid in your area, but it's not specifically something you can overclock. It's not that you can increase the wattage by making like a software kind of adjustment on your PSU. So no.
There's some headroom on most power supplies, so
it's not really overclocking. It's not a change you make.
No,
it's
no,
just like
if you have a 650 power supply and you would draw like in a short period of time for 750 watts, it might not trip, like it might not turn off.
Because that 650, especially for like the proper units and the proper brands, it's a continuous power that it can deliver. Yeah. So it can, if you have a spike over it, it will not directly switch off. For example, if
the
you
good
have
ones don't. Yeah.
Yeah. But also like what we did with the 12900 KS and the 3090 Ti, we went over 1000 watts on a 1000 watt unit.
The AC side, the AC side, with the efficiency in mind, should
go
that's true. Up to 1100.
Yeah, because indeed we measured on the AC side, and you always lose a bit of in efficiency. Yeah. But still, even if on the DC side you would go over 1000 watts, it will not switch off directly.
No, not immediately. No. For longer periods, yes, probably.
Yeah, because it's really at least for that unit, it's the continuous power it can deliver. Punisher guy says CPU cache size can be a big boost too. Yeah, that is, for example, what we saw, what AMD did with the 5800X3D.
Yeah. Also, Hard to Unbox did a test with that and then disabled an amount of cores on an i9, and then just clocked them all the same and see what the differences were. And also compared it to, for example, an i5 with the same amount of cores.
But yeah, for the cache, it also really depends on the type of workload. That's also something what you see when you compare a 5800X with a 5800X3D. The 5800X3D is clocked slightly lower than the 5800X, but in gaming it's much faster because of that 3D cache that they're using. But on the other hand, if you're, for example, running Cinebench on a 5800X, it will be faster than on the X3D. Yeah. So it really depends on what you want to do with your CPU. If you want to do rendering, then a 5800X will be a better and more affordable option than an X3D. But for gaming, that cache made a huge difference.
Yeah. Not all games, but
not all games. Yeah, some games are more sensitive, but in general, for gaming it's pretty good. Whereas for productivity workloads, you rather have the higher clocks than the cache.
And of course, with that kind of a demo, you will also see like high-end GPUs with low settings, low resolution and low settings games, then you will see the biggest difference. Yeah. Same as we showed here.
Before we go to the comparison between different graphics cards, because we also tested that, we have some more winners for the giveaway. So if you haven't participated yet, go to msi.com/2/insider. And our next winners for today, Ruud.
Geek Padawan.
Congratulations, Geek Padawan. You also won a game code for Rainbow Six Extraction. And our next winner?
Surprise me.
Well, here's your surprise.
Surprise me.
Yeah. Your surprise is a game code for Rainbow Six Extraction. Also, congratulations. And our next winner?
Lakota 1966.
Congratulations. You also won a game code for Rainbow Six Extraction. To all winners, keep an eye out on your mailbox, and we'll email the code to you in the coming days with some instructions on how to redeem it. If you have participated yet, make sure to do so, because at the end of the stream, we will still draw some more winners for some more game codes. Question in chat, can I overclock an F CPU? Yes. F is basically means that if you're running an F SKU, you don't have integrated graphics, but it has nothing to do with the fact whether or not you can overclock it. K means you have an unlock multiplier, but you need a Z series chipset in order to utilize that unlock multiplier. But with base clock overclocking, you can basically run any of the models. So K, non-K, F, non-F doesn't really matter. Let's continue with some more testing we did, because this I think is very interesting, and this also will very much define whether or not this would be a good choice for you. And that's the choice of the GPU you want to combine this with. So Ruud, what do we see here?
So this is the comparison, or at least the increase in performance or in FPS in these games listed below. I should get my chair out of the way and my head, but I cannot read the screen anymore.
Wait, I can solve this.
Oh, okay,
and you're
that's
gone.
better. No, that's good. So if you're overclocking it like we did to 5 gigahertz, so the 40 times the 125 megahertz base clock, then this is the percentage increase in frames per second you will get, either in the 1% lows or in the average FPS. In CSGO, Rainbow Six Siege, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Watch Dogs Legion, and Far Cry 6. Those titles used, from our experience, respond very well to CPU frequency and also CPU overclocking. So that's also what we tested here. And as you can see, I started my test with this motherboard and CPU with the RTX 3050. So that's all the way on the right side. If I do this, then it's the other way for you. That's because of the camera. So the RTX 3050 only scores like maybe an average of 2%, I guess. FPS increase with an overclock which is 25% higher. So at first I was a bit underwhelmed about the performance of you
were like, it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, so I was another CPU overclock that doesn't help you in gaming. So then I tried the 3070 Ti, that's on the other end, so on the left side, and that will show you I think it was 24% in average from these games. So 24%, that's almost close to the overclock percentage. So that was really amazing. So anything in between, I started testing later on. So I wanted to find out where exactly makes this CPU overclock sense. So if you buy a 3050 and a 3060 for 1080p gaming, doesn't make that much sense, because the FPS increase isn't that much. It's below 5% probably. So so when you get a 3060 Ti or higher, then the overclock makes much more sense and increases the FPS a lot. And I think with the 3060 Ti we got something about 19% average increase. So that's already pretty good. So yeah, in this case, the tipping point lies between the 3060 and the 3060 Ti, at least for the 1080p.
Yeah, so if you would draw a line in the middle,
yeah,
what's on the left makes a big difference, what's on the right doesn't make a very big difference.
Yeah. And if you do on the left, then it means right for the viewers at home, I noticed. Anyway. But this is 1080p gaming, so I don't expect a lot of people who play on a 1080p monitor to buy a 3070 Ti. Probably there's still people doing that, but the majority will probably have a higher resolution monitor like 1440p. But those results we also have.
Yeah, so when looking at this, you really see that when doing this CPU overclocking on the base clock, there are quite clear sweet spots both in the CPU side and in the GPU side.
Yeah.
So concluding, when we taking a look, like I'm talking about 1080p now, but concluding from what we have already seen with the comparison from Hardware Unboxed with the i3, i5 and i7, and now what we see with the different graphics cards, you would say that the most interesting combination would, for example, be a CPU like a 12400 with a 3060 Ti or higher, when looking at the NVIDIA side of things.
Yeah.
ACM Venom was asking, how many participants are there for the giveaway? Right now, 937 participants. But keep in mind that we're not only streaming on Twitch and YouTube, but also on Facebook, on Twitter. Soon we will also start experimenting with streaming on LinkedIn for our new Pro series.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, we're on many different platforms. So almost 1,000 participants in the giveaway right now. Let me see. I saw some. Telo Mina says my MSI motherboard is a decade old, but still going strong, I hope. Anko says, why is there no MSI store in my town? Well, we don't have that many MSI stores around the world. Some places have them, but they're not extremely common. I don't have one in my town either, unfortunately. So let's maybe take a look at some higher resolutions, Ruud. Because this is 1080p, but you also tested, at least with some GPUs where it makes sense, on 1440p and Ultra HD.
Here I just took the two GPUs that made sense for the 1080p, so that gave close to 20% or more increase in FPS. And if you would increase the resolution to 4040p with the same games, and the gains will be a lot less. So not sure what the averages were exactly, but I think a 3070 Ti is still an acceptable gain, but not in all games. So yeah, the average was around 5%, I believe, and with a 3060 Ti is below 3%. So then it doesn't really matter that much. So it's more like a GPU bottleneck, even on the high FPS games like CS:GO and Rainbow Six Siege.
So this is a bit what you also see between getting a more expensive CPU when you're going to play at a high resolution.
Yeah.
It doesn't really give you anything extra.
No.
But also overclocking your CPU will not give you that much benefit either if you're going for a higher resolution, because of the simple fact that you will make the GPU the bottleneck basically.
In this case, GPU overclocking would be making more sense.
Yeah.
But with GPUs it's also very hard to overclock more than we can already extract out of it with stock speeds and stock cooling.
Yeah, so basically 1080p, especially with higher end graphics cards like basically 3060 and up, will give you a big performance boost. 1440p will still give you a little bit of a performance boost, but not nearly as much as 1080p. No. But then we have Ultra HD.
Yeah.
So
it's almost
2160p.
Yeah.
And this is basically where the benefit of a faster CPU is gone, right?
Yeah. Yeah. In general, it's still like between 0 and 1% faster, but yeah, it's close to nothing. Yeah.
So this is also why for Ultra HD gaming, if you play, like even CS:GO doesn't make a difference either. If you're going to play Ultra HD, don't invest too much money on the highest end CPU if gaming is the only thing you do, because it doesn't give you anything extra, and also overclocking your CPU will not give you any additional benefit, at least in gaming.
Yeah. Spend your money wisely and put as much in the GPU performance part, and that will give you the most FPS in high
Or in
resolution.
case you're overclocking, then put your extra power consumption in your GPU instead of your CPU.
Yep.
Let me see if there's some more questions in chat. What the FPS says with a 4090 4K will show also performance bust. I don't know. I'm not even sure if there will be a 4090. Ross Sulty says, Mike, I love that t-shirt. Thank you, thank you. We like rabbits. Guido says, I wonder how Call of Duty Warzone would fare with 3 specs. I think you mean with these specs. Do you know about Call of Duty Warzone, like whether or not it's more CPU bound or GPU bound? Right?
It's more CPU bound, yeah. So it's not that heavy. It's also more for the high FPS game.
Put you back up, by the way. There
so, yeah, it's not as not as high FPS as CS:GO or Rainbow Six Siege, but it's probably more between 200 and 300 FPS with a 3070 Ti and higher.
So a game like Call of Duty Warzone, especially if you play it at a lower resolution, if you would run it at 1080p, then it could potentially give you quite a performance increase when overclocking your CPU.
With a 3060 Ti and up? Yeah.
AZ and Venom says CPU bound, sucks all your cores. If you have 100 cores, and it will use it. Not specifically, because CPU bound very often refers to single core performance rather than multi-core performance. Yeah. So if you can have a CPU bound title like, for example, esports titles like CS:GO or Rainbow Six Siege. You can have 100 cores, but it will not give you better performance than 6 cores. It's all about the speed of those cores. So it will not be able to utilize the extra cores. And especially when you run CPUs with an extremely high core count, like for example Ryzen Threadrippers, stuff like that, you usually see that they're clocked lower in order to keep energy consumption within certain borders. If you're running a 64 core and would run them all at a high frequency, it's totally impossible to cool. So you see that the individual cores are clocked lower, and that will actually hurt your gaming performance. So if you would compare gaming performance of, for example, the AMD AM4 platform to Ryzen Threadripper, most AM4 CPUs, the more recent ones, will definitely perform better than Threadripper, even if they're on the same architecture, simply because they're clocked higher, because there are not as many cores, so it's still possible to cool it. And the same goes for Intel. For their high-end desktop platform, X299 will not perform as good as their mainstream platform with fewer cores but faster cores. Asian Fan says, I'm saying the new Call of Duty does. It's supposed to support more cores. It will use it. Because yeah, like more recent titles, they do get better with multi-core support. So more recent titles and more recent game engines usually benefit more from having more cores. Like older titles, sometimes a dual core or a quad core will be just as fast as a 6 core and an 8 core. With more modern titles, I would say like the above 6 cores, there are not that many titles that really show a difference, right? At this point, at least.
Sometimes there's like the simulation games or the top few games that is also strategy, and you need to have a lot of stuff going on in your viewing field. That usually benefits from extra CPU power.
So maybe like city builders
behind it. So yeah, like Civilization or that kind of.
I also
games.
heard. Do you know Factorio, the game?
Yeah, I only know it from Hardware Unboxed, so they use it as a benchmark.
Yeah, because I believe at a certain point it becomes so big that one becomes like really multi-core CPU bound. So in that situation, I would say yes, then you can benefit from having more cores. But like there is no real shooter where you will benefit, for example, from a 16 core over an 8 core.
No. And most games don't utilize the CPU or all the cores fully. So yes, it might use 6 threads or 12 threads even, but those threads are not used 100%. They're just used 30% most of the time. So 50% is already very high for an i7 or higher.
I see some questions about City Skylines and Star Citizen. I'm not 100% certain if they properly utilize all those cores. But those types of games, in theory, would be the ones that could benefit most from this. But if they have optimized it or not, I'm not certain about.
And usually they're not graphically that intense, so usually the bottleneck is always on the CPU, even if you have a very high-end CPU.
Yeah. Then before we close it off for today, I already saw some questions about this. Price and availability, always an interesting point as well. So this board, it depends very much on the region, but it is expected approximately August. Can be certain regions where it arrives a little bit later. Also depends on the region whether or not it will be early or late August. So best to check with your local reseller whether or not the reseller ordered it and when they expect to receive it. The price will be $199 as an indication, so this differs on different factors, differs on the retailer, so it's just an indication price. Also differs on VAT, for example, for the euro price, but it will be $199 US excluding VAT, or 219 euros including VAT. And the VAT for the euro price is for this calculation is 20%, so it may differ a bit per country. If the VAT in your country is slightly higher, it will be a bit more expensive. If it's slightly lower, it will be a little bit cheaper, but on average in Europe it's about 20%. So that's about the price you're looking at, and that makes it definitely not the cheapest B660 board out there, because it's still, for B660, it's a relatively high-end board. And of course it comes with some of the features that you will not find in any other motherboard in our B660 lineup, like PCI Express Gen 5, base clock overclocking. So yeah, that's why it's slightly more expensive than the non-max model here. But yeah, the interesting thing is also that you can combine this with a very affordable CPU, because like the i5 12400 is, well, I wouldn't say cheap, but it's a very affordable CPU. For what it is, you could almost call it cheap, I would say. Yeah. Price performance of that CPU on stock is already insane, and especially looking at the gains you make in certain situations, it can really be worth it to combine it with. So yeah, concluding, we would say, I think the sweet spot, 12400, maybe an i3 even, and 3060 Ti or up, and then you could see big gains for, well, significantly less money actually. Yeah. Before we close it off for today, let me pick our last winners. If the system is working, I'm getting an error message. Interesting. Okay, it works again. You guys are lucky because I thought it was broken. Drawing. Okay, dude, the honor is all yours again. Let me see. There.
Sasha Elvis.
Congratulations, Sasha Elvis. You also won a game code for Rainbow Six Extractions.
And Michael.
Michael, congratulations.
Yeah.
You also won a game code. Please, not all Michaels in chat
No.
be very happy right now, because I'm sure there will be more than one.
So that's,
you know that you're this specific Michael if you receive an email with a game code. So this specific Michael, congratulations. You will find out later on if you're the right Michael or not. Then our next winner,
Flamey.
Congratulations, you also won a game code for Rainbow Six Extraction. And the last winner for today,
Red Mage NW.
Congratulations, you also won a game code for Rainbow Six Extractions. To all winners, please check your email. We'll email the codes to you in the coming days. Also make sure to redeem them as soon as possible, because I believe they expire not too long from now. So make sure to redeem them right away as soon as you receive the email. That was it for today. Next week, I think Eric and I will be back. Peter will be on holiday, so that basically means that it's usually Eric and I, unless it's a technical topic, because then we have Ruud. And we're going to talk about some of our new Pro Series motherboards. And I heard some rumors, Eric is currently preparing this already a little bit, and I heard some rumors that he is going to tear a monitor apart. And usually if Eric is going to tear stuff apart, especially something like a monitor, it's great comedy and probably stuff will die. So I think that that should be an enjoyable live stream. So next week, same place, same time, we'll be back with another live stream. Of course, another giveaway again. So if you didn't win this time, make sure to be here again next week. I hope you all enjoyed being here. Thanks for joining again, Ruud.
Yeah, thanks for watching.
For all the technical knowledge and the demonstrations. And that was it for today. And have a good rest of your day, evening, morning, wherever you are. And hope to see you here again next week. Okay. So thank you and bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.